Awesome. So my name is Deanna Heimsaw. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work locally at Mental Health Partners. I'm contracted to work at 2 elementary schools with our school-based program. So I'm at Whittier Elementary School and Crestview Elementary School. So currently I'm working with kids 5 to 10 and their families. But I'm going to talk more about myself in a little bit. I wanted to sort of follow the vibe of the meditation that we just did and how mindful we all got and sort of feeling ourselves. And I want to encourage us all to just do a bit of reflection for a second. There's a reason that all of you are in this room, taking this class or in your program. There's a reason you've come to choose to be professional helpers in the world. Like, you're not becoming bankers or tellers. Or, I've had therapists who are like, what would it be like to be the guy who hands out the tickets that, on the toll? Maybe that would be less stressful than what I do. So there's a reason that we all come into this work. And sometimes it has to do, usually most of the times, it has to do with who we are and where we've come from, what our lives have given us. So I want you to just take a moment to write down a couple of the top reasons, either why you're in this program, or maybe even just why you're in this class, or if you know already that you want to work with kids and families and adults doing therapy, and write down why you've come to this work. Just take a few minutes. And paying attention to people's pencils and computers, and it looks like a fair amount of you are done, but not everyone. I'd like you, when you're ready, to turn to someone next to you, or maybe there's a group next to you, there's 2 or 3 of you, and just share 1 or 2 of those things, one of those reasons why you're coming into this. And just take a few minutes to share with your neighbor.
So interesting. I just really, I don't even feel so I think I was meant to do this work.
Mine sometimes I don't know if I can.
And I really thought about that during
And also, I really desire to understand.
I know it's in mind. We were okay. I mean, the more familiar you are, the more you feel it. But still, everything changed. It's completely up to the whole family felt Minnie's family. Yeah, the community system, which is a family system. I just think the mindfulness piece is really more important. Everyone in a better place, you're more fully aware of it? Or do you feel like it was something like, was there awareness? I don't think there was feeling in that way, do you think? Or is this why you come here?
Yeah, I think that the city is having we're not. Yeah, it's like now
there's like that kind of forever effect on it. Well, no, but
like real quick. Logistics, you know, like tomorrow what's happening today.
how do you hit it? Yeah, it's like a big deal today. Just probably, I mean, that's just what why do you think like families do that?
I think I wanted to feel closed out.
Hey, Cal, could you do me a favor? Could you just make sure it's filming? Do you know how?
I figured it out. I always start with myself.
I'm sure it is. I just got a little nervous. Like,
Are we filming? Let's
yeah,
find
I
out.
think it is. It's blinking.
Is there blinking? Green seems good. Access seems good.
Okay, I think it's filming.
I think the red means we're recording.
Good.
And we have been for 7 minutes and 35
Yay!
seconds.
I just was like, what the fuck? If this isn't recording, I'm gonna miss something really good. Ooh, excuse me. Okay, that was cool. That was cool.
Well, and Diane, thank you for this rock. I'm just going to be holding it like this all the time. It
Heart.
feels so nice.
Yeah,
It's like
it's
perfectly
been
weighted.
meditated and blessed a lot, so
So good. I love it. Okay, thank you.
matches you.
So I got to listen a little bit and was so delighted to what I was hearing because I feel like it jives with what I'm going to talk about today and my experience and how I've come to be doing what I'm doing. I will just introduce this book in case you guys haven't read it yet. I think I've met neurotherapists who've read this book. It's by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, and she wrote Trauma Mastery. And it's really, really good. When I was managing a team, we read through it as a team and sort of worked through some of the exercises about how to take care of ourselves in the midst of being professional caregivers or helpers. She suggests that we come to the work of being professional caregivers or helpers to heal our own trauma, to master aspects of our own lives that we want to get right this time. And kind of because we do that, we need to take extra good care of ourselves. We need to recognize when we're coming up against a situation or working with a mom or a client or a kid that is really triggering for us, that we take the time with ourselves and with our supervisors to really work with that so that we can recognize that what's coming up is our own experience and our own desire to help or our own trauma or whatever it is, so that we can last, so we can do this work for a long time for other people. So I want you all just sort of in your life as you go through this program and maybe even just today, sort of consider what doing this work means to you and what parts of yourself you may be intending to heal by doing this for other people. And get prepared, because it will come at you when you meet those clients who give you that reflection that reminds you of what's happened in your life. So I want people to know that as they come into being clinicians and therapists and so forth. It's, you will need it, and it's not easy. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. I was born in Papua New Guinea. If nobody knows where that is, it's an island just north of Australia. My parents were Lutheran missionaries there for 15 years. My brothers and I were all born there, and I grew up, well, for the first couple of years of my life, I grew up in an area where there had only been Western influence for 30 years. Europeans had plopped themselves down into the Stone Age and tried to make a difference, improve people's lives, stuff like that, and that's where I was born. My first babysitter was a man who spoke only his native tongue, which is a language called Enga, and his little baby was my age, and I used to sit in the dirt with them and eat sweet potatoes and listen to them speak their language, and then go home and listen to my mom speak English, and then go play and listen to my friends speak a version of English that's called Pidgin. And it was awesome. I loved it. I grew up climbing guava trees and singing songs in the trees with all my little friends who were all black and wondering why I had spots and white skin and red hair instead of, curly hair and dark skin. We left New Guinea when I was 8. And in answering those questions that I asked you to think about, I've realized in the last 10 years or so that I came into doing this work because leaving Papua New Guinea was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And my parents didn't know how to talk about it. They were going home. They were from America. They were coming back to their homeland where, everything was normal to them. Sort of. They'd been gone for 15 years, from 68 to 84. Can you imagine that period of time, being gone from the U.S. and the kinds of changes that happened during the time they were in Papua New Guinea? The shift back to the U.S. was dramatic for all of us, and we didn't talk about it. We were encouraged to, dive into our studies and do our sports, and so I was like a straight A student, and I did gymnastics for 8.5 years competitively. And my brothers played football, and whenever you felt anything, you just did school and did your sport, and did school and did your sport, and stayed up late and did more school, and then you did your sport. We were all different ages when we came back. I was 7, my brothers were 11 and 13. So if you think sort of developmentally about what we were doing at those ages in our lives, all 3 of us were impacted really differently. And then you think about our personalities. My eldest brother is kind of a warrior. I often wonder if he belonged in New Guinea and was born to, Lutheran white parents. Because he had a really hard time, super angry, just really angry big brother, which was, of course, then no fun for me to have a really angry big brother. Luckily, my brother, who's only 4 years older than me, super sweet spirit. He's a theater professor now and has been for a long time, and has 2 beautiful boys. He was my dearest friend when we came back to America because we didn't have anybody else. We didn't have any friends, we just had us. So we became this really tight unit. And the only way we made sense of leaving New Guinea was talking about New Guinea, but not talking about how sad we were or how anxious we were about being in American schools and having to switch everything over from being in an international Australian school where everything was metric and everything was British, to being in American schools where, I could not make sense of why a $20 bill and a $10 bill and a $5 bill were all green, and why quarters were big, but then nickels were bigger than pennies, and then dimes were the size of a penny, and that's the age I was, right? It didn't make any sense to me. And multiplication, all this stuff, it was so different. And I was in my developmental stage where I was working on mastery. I wanted to be good at stuff, and suddenly I went from a place where I felt like I was good at stuff to a place where I really didn't understand anything. The first 6 months we were back in the States, we lived in Chicago for my parents to catch up on courses and getting their teaching licenses in the US and so forth. And all my friends were black again, which I thought was awesome. But they were telling me about racism, and I was like, what are you talking about? And I was enraged. I was so upset. Like, when we came back to America, I thought it was going to be like Disneyland and Santa Claus and stuff like that. And my first friends in America told me about racism, and I was so upset about it. Anyway, so that's, I think, why I want to be a family therapist and why I work with kids and why I work with families, because I want people to be able to talk about this stuff. I want kids to be able to tell their parents, this is hard, and I'm anxious, and I don't get it, and my friends laugh at me because I have a funny accent. How am I supposed to talk? This is how I've always talked. Or I say this word, that word's a bad word in America. I can't say that word anymore. So I want kids and families to be able to talk about these things. And my dad was so depressed for years and years and years and years. And we didn't really understand it. And he didn't have any way to talk about it or let it go, except to dive into his work more. And his work kept failing him. He would get a job, and then they'd be like, oh, sorry, we don't have enough money to rehire you this year, and then my dad would have to look for another job, and then we'd move again, and we'd move again. And we moved every 3 years, pretty much, after we came back to the States. And when I was 15, I was totally done with it. We moved to California from Oregon, which is like the worst thing, again, like, oh my God. It's like, I love Oregon. Why are we living in California where everybody's plastic and 16-year-olds get BMWs for their birthday? And it was awful for me. I just decided at that point in my life, I'm not going to make any friends anymore. I've made friends my whole life, and then I just leave. And, and all of that stuff, just sort of unprocessed grief and all kinds of things. But the funny thing is, so I went to undergrad in Indiana at a small Lutheran college, sort of like went to Lutheran schools practically my whole life, because I was a missionary kid. I studied abroad. I loved learning foreign languages. That exposure when I was itty-bitty was super good for developing my language centers, so I started learning Spanish in high school and wanted to go to a small Lutheran college that had an excellent study abroad program, and found the only one. And got a scholarship and studied sort of like international social work in a way when I was there. And then many years later, went to DU for my graduate degree in social work. And I was sitting in my first family therapy class, and I was sitting through my first lecture, and I looked around the room and I was like, wait a minute, you all want to be therapists? Oh geez, I'm in the wrong program. Because it was not what I had intended to be. I wanted to do international social development work and macro interventions for communities and all this kind of stuff. And sitting with somebody in the room to talk about their emotions was not on my list of things I wanted to do. So I actually didn't do a clinical program at DU. With the master's program, you can do a community-based social work master's. But then I did a smattering of clinical classes because I was like, well, group work, probably that'd be good, and family stuff, okay, I'll do that stuff too. But then, of course, when I graduated, I got a bilingual family therapy job. That's what was available, and I needed to get a job, so that's what I did. I worked at Savio House doing family preservation, which is super duper stressful, working with kids who either have already been removed from their parents or kids who are at risk of being removed from their parents, parents who are using drugs, who are neglectful or abusive. Really ridiculously stressful. Super rewarding when you could make a big difference in somebody's life, but also like hard, working with itty-bitty humans who were not being protected and were living in dangerous situations, and just trying to do your best with mentally ill parents and drug abusing parents to help them get things right and keep their kids. Parents with the desperate emotions of, I'm going to lose my kids if I can't get my shit together. Right? Super stressful. Then my husband he came to Europa for a semester. We ended up doing all these weird things in between. I took a break after that job because it really wore me out. And then I ran into functional family therapy, which is a research-based model working with adolescents between 11 and 18. It's been around for about 40 years. It's really good numbers for outcomes for high-risk youth. And I ended up learning all the clinical stuff that I never really learned during my grad program. And I loved it. I loved it so much. It was about believing in people and increasing people's hope and decreasing negativity and helping family members see the goodness in each other. And I was like, I need someone to do this with me and my husband. So I did FFT is what they call it for about 5 years, and that's what brought me to Boulder. I ended up getting a job here. My husband wanted to move back here. He's from this area, and every time we left, he was like, "Oh, I gotta go back to Colorado," which is hard for me, right? Because I'm an international kid, and I wanted to live everywhere else but in one place. And so, anyway, so we came back here. I worked at Halcyon, which is our BVSD, the Boulder Valley School District's highest level of special ed support for kids in the district, middle school and high school. Again, like super intense work. So kids, adolescents with bipolar, suicidality, kids who've been brutalized for years and were suicidal. Really, really challenging stuff. I met my first actively suicidal client when I just got that job. He was maybe 16 at the time, and he tried to kill himself every February for 5 years. He was a victim of incest from his dad, who was a doctor, and his mom didn't find out until he was maybe in 8th grade or something like that. It was devastating. I was physically in pain working with this student, especially while he was suicidal. I'd come home every night just like this stabbing pain in my shoulder. And I was doing family therapy with him and his mom, who of course carried just ridiculous amounts of guilt for what had happened. And the deal was I was going to text him every night at 6, and if he was safe, I would turn off my work phone and go to bed feeling like he was going to be okay. And if he wasn't, he would tell me. And one night I texted him, I said, "Hey, are you all right?" And he said, "No, actually, I'm not all right." And I asked my mom to take me to the hospital. And for the first time in 5 years, he didn't hurt himself. He didn't drink himself into toxicity. He said, "Mom, I don't feel safe. Please take me to the hospital." And they went, and he stayed, and he got what he needed, and he came home. And he hasn't been hospitalized since then. He's selling real estate in Long Beach. Never do this, but he's on my Facebook because I love this kid so much. Yeah, and that's the kind of impact you can have on people, but it takes its toll, right? And as soon as his mom took him to the hospital, all my pain went away.
Wow.
I was like, that wasn't mine. I was carrying that for someone else. Wow, it was a big lesson for me. So I worked at Halcyon for a while, and then I was a FFT supervisor, which meant I was like the research-based trained supervisor therapist for our FFT team and 4 or 5 clinicians. One of which, who I think you must have spoken to, is just
She's going to come to class.
Oh, awesome.
Marina?
No, my guy was Jonathan Kaplan.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember him?
He was my student. Yeah.
Super fantastic. He actually ended up being the supervisor after me. So I supervised that team working with high-risk youth. So then, when you supervise, you get all the worst stories about all the hardest cases that your therapists have. That's like another, oh my gosh, I have to take extra super duper good care of myself. And then our program manager left, and I ended up supervising the entire team of 16 home-based therapists. So we were, again, sort of serving the highest risk kids and families that Mental Health Partners serves in people's homes, trying to keep teenagers out of the hospital, trying to keep children living with their parents, trying to rehabilitate parents who needed to be better parents so that their kids would be safe, all that kind of really good stuff. And then Mental Health Partners went through a big reorg and sat me down and said, so you're losing your position. Do you want to work at a school? And I was like, sure. Sure. Actually, I was kind of hoping for something a little less stressful than managing my entire team and then dealing with upper management and how incredibly difficult that can be when you're kind of like the middle person. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm working with 5 to 10-year-olds. And it's like 1,000 times easier than everything else I've ever done. I get to play with kids all day long. And I have trucks, and I have cars, and I have sand, and I have Legos, and I have dolls, and it's so delightful. And parents of kids that little aren't totally burnt out on them yet. They're not ready to give them up for adoption, and, kick them out, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm having a really good time. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now. And I get summers off, and it's just amazing. Okay. So, so you can see under there what I sort of base what I do now on are all the things I've done I just sort of put it all together, and I like synthesizing things and making sense of what other people have done, and also sort of research-based, making sure that what I'm doing is working, and it's brain-based, and it's science-based, and stuff like that, so I'm not just going with my woo-woo, although I do that quite a bit too. So I'll start out with some of the things I learned from FFT. This is my favorite, because when we think about families, I think too often in our culture, we look at the symptoms of one person and we give them a diagnosis. But when you're working with families, you really, even if there's only one diagnosable person in the family, the way their symptoms are coming out is a part of the family system. Does that make sense? So what I've drawn here is a volcano. And the spiral in the volcano is the family cycle. What is that? What do those behavior patterns look like between parents and kids? What's the parent relationship look like? How do they parent their kids? What do those fights look like? What does the peaceful time look like? And then the red at the top, the explosion, are the symptoms. And I'll give an example. I worked with a lovely family. I did FFT with them. And their daughter was referred to our program because she ended up in the hospital with THC toxicity, which meant she was smoking a lot of weed, a lot. She was losing weight, she was vomiting, it was horrible. And her parents were really well off, very well educated, worked for amazing companies here in Boulder. They lived in this gorgeous house in Gun Barrel, and their son was like top of his class, graduating from Boulder High, going to this amazing college. And here was this young lady, I think she was maybe a sophomore at the time, who was in the hospital, depressed and high out of her mind. So it would have been really easy to just be like, well, your daughter's depressed. Let's give her a diagnosis and get her on meds and she'll, go from there. But, using this model, using FFT, I looked at the whole family and I said, what's happening to her is a symptom of the dysfunction of the family. So let's look at what's going on in the family. And I met with mom and dad on their own, and this was super duper helpful, even though it was sort of a veering from the model that I was using. And dad told me all about his mom who was on meds his whole life. She was depressed, and he had a mom who was just kind of like stoned on old depression medication from when he was little. And he's like, there's no way I'm putting my daughter on that stuff. And the mom talked about her bipolar sister and how she'd always rescued her bipolar sister, and she didn't want to be rescuing her daughter anymore. Her daughter had to like buck up and be strong and get through this. And I was like, whew, okay, well there it is, right? Dad doesn't want her on meds. And mom is like trying to fight this old pattern from her childhood with her sister. And that means that this young lady, who probably needed something to support her depression, was not getting help, and she was smoking weed to deal with it. So when we brought it back to the family, and then there was the brother, who was just like this perfect brother. We're having this conversation, and what you do in FFT is you sort of sequence. So what happens, and then what happens next, and what happens after that, and what happens after that. So we sequenced their pattern, that sort of cycle, and I realized that the brother was super snarky. He was pretty negative, and was sort of knew he was the good kid, and his sister was the fuck up. And she knew it, and he knew it, and he would add these comments when parents were chiding her or chastising her or whatever would happen. And we talked about all of that out loud together as a family. I was like, this is everybody, right? And so in the cycle, everybody has something new, something different to do. And one of the biggest things that came out of that was helping mom and dad just really listen to their daughter and really listen to what she valued, what was important to her, and how what she valued was completely different than what her parents valued. And it turned out that she had lupus. It turned out that she had lupus, and mom and dad were discounting her complaints of pain and her complaints of her depression and her chronic pain. And they finally took her to the doctor, took her to a psychiatrist, got her on steroids or whatever it was, and got her on a mild antidepressant. A year later, I got a text from the mom saying her daughter had graduated from high school. She and her brother were living in an apartment, and they were both going to college, and and she was like, "Thank you so much for what you did for my family."
Autoimmune too, lupus, turned towards it's self,
Totally.
internal auto.
Absolutely. And anybody could have looked at that family and been like, "Well, your daughter, she's symptomatic, she has depression, she just needs to be served." But following my model and working with the whole family really changed the entire system and helped mom and dad see what they were bringing to the table that was adding to what she was going through.
Marina Green is going to come in. Marina Green,
Mhm.
she's going to do an actual functional family therapy whole class.
Oh, awesome, awesome. She's so amazing. You guys will love her. I like want to meet her someday.
I don't even know. I mean, I'm just feel so blessed just finding you and her. I just was told, do this, find you, find her.
Awesome. So you'll see it. So I'm going to skip through this a little faster because she'll probably teach you all
Yeah,
this.
she's going to teach it, but this is great. You can't get it enough, something that's
Totally,
good.
totally. So this is something I learned from FFT, kind of looking at relationships and trying to understand what people are trying to get out of their relationships. Some people are more independent in what they want. You know, people who are in relationship are like, there's you and there's me, and I do a lot of my stuff and you do a lot of your stuff, and we come together and that's all I need. And then some people who are like, oh my God, I can't live without you. Can we just be together like all the time and let me live on your hip and live in your house and sit in your bed? And if you leave anywhere, I'm going to text you like 30 million times to make sure you're okay. And maybe, oh gosh, and then if I'm jealous, that makes it even worse. And then you have kids and families are kind of in between. They, like that connection. They like that independence. Some people manage that really beautifully. Feel really secure when they're, independent. Really secure when they're connecting. Other people don't handle that very well at all, and they swing madly from side to side, being like, I want you, I love you, I can't live without you. Fuck you, get away from me, I can't live with you. And a lot of times when people are in a relationship with each other, the conflict happens when you need different things.
Yes.
I need connection. No, I don't want you here. You see this in partnerships. You see this in relationships between parents and kids. A mom who's really autonomous and independent, and a kid who wants more connection. And those sort of explosion points happen when the needs are opposite.
Right.
Right? And then the other thing I see a lot, which is really interesting when you work with people who don't do what we do, there's sort of this cultural belief that parents need to be the authority in the home. They need to be the boss. That's like how it's supposed to be. We get that from our parents and their parents, and that's kind of intergenerational and cultural. But not all families are like that. So when we work with families, we need to recognize it. We may run into one where the parents are not the authority in the home. They're the friend parent. They're the like, I want to get along with you and be your friend and hang out with you. And the kid's like, I love that. So does that mean I make my own rules? And what are my boundaries? Do I get to make that up? And then there are cases where kids are kind of more have influence and power. And it could be for any reason, right? It could be a parent in a wheelchair. It could be an immigrant family that doesn't speak English, and the oldest kid is translating everything for everybody all the time and ends up being really parentified. Any number of reasons in the family history that there's been a shift in the dynamic. And what you'll learn from Marnie is that you can work with it. Parents just need different skills. They can't use the one-up skills on their kids if they don't have that hierarchy in the family. And the example I'll give you is I worked with, oh my gosh, one of my favorite students I worked with at Halcyon, a 17-year-old African-American lesbian, gangster. She was awesome. I loved her so much. And she was living with a white family. Her mom was in long-term care for early onset dementia. So she was growing up with her mom's best friend in a white home. And the mom, I'll call her the mom because she was essentially the primary caregiver guardian. She'd come in and be like, she won't do what I tell her to do. And I'm like, you're right. She is not going to let you tell her what to do. You are symmetrical with her. She's a peer with you. And the moment you stomp your foot and say, I'm the boss, you're going to do what I tell you to do, she's going to say, no way, I'm out of here. She's going to fight that, and you're going to feel like you're banging your head against the wall because she's not going to take orders from you. So we had to work really hard on figuring that out, right? Because this mom was adamant. She was like, no, I'm the boss. Like, no, you're not of this one. No. Maybe of your 7-year-old, and maybe of your kids that you've raised since babyhood, but this one needs something different,
That's so brilliant.
Isn't that incredible?
This is great.
You just be like, let's pay attention to how this relationship actually works, and then use the parenting tools that are actually going to work for you. So I love it. It's super duper helpful. So that's sort of, you'll learn a lot more from Marnie Huffman-Green about that. She's like expert FFT, does international trainings all over the world about how to do it. She's amazing. So then what I did, when I was at Halcyon, I was there, I was supposed to do FFT, and then I was supposed to do individual therapy with the students at the school. And then I had students who just really didn't respond to the FFT model. And I was like, what is going on? Because I did FFT in Illinois, in like exactly the way it was meant to be done, and almost all of my families did better. Almost all of them. When I was working at Halcyon, I was like, I have kids who are not doing better. Families who are not doing better. Like, what is up with this? And one kid in particular was this boy who'd been through foster care and had been removed from his mom and now was living with his dad, and he'd only lived with his dad for about a year. And he completely blew up. He ended up in juvenile detention for like a year. I think he got a year-long sentence. I was like, what am I doing wrong? And then I was introduced to dyadic developmental psychotherapy, otherwise known as family-focused attachment therapy, and learned so much stuff. I love it so much. So you guys probably, how many of you are familiar?
We've studied, we've done a lot of
Awesome.
attachment.
Awesome. So I can just like skip through these.
But you bringing in the family perspective. And what's
Absolutely.
And
in-
examples, I think, are super.
Examples. So the one thing that I love about this, that so my trainer for the attachment model, his name is Daniel Hughes. I absolutely recommend reading anything he's written.
Oh, yeah.
So
Daniel
good.
Hughes, write that down, you guys. He's
Daniel
awesome.
Hughes.
Yes.
He's got a book called Creating Loving Attachments. It's really, really good for parents. He's got a book called Brain-Based Parenting,
Wow.
which is more, he wrote it with a neurobiologist. Super fascinating, like why certain parenting strategies work based on our neurobiology.
What was the first one?
Creating Loving Attachments. I always recommend that to parents because it's a little easier to get through.
What was the second one?
Brain-based parenting. But he's got tons of stuff out there. Now he's got it for teachers and how kids can settle their nervous systems at school. He's got like a manual about how to do his model. I can't rattle that one off because I never recommend it to the parents or anything, but if you just Google him, you'll see all of his stuff. Super, super awesome. And I took all my trainings from him on this model. He's retiring now and training other people to do his trainings, but I got to meet him personally, and he knows my name. I love that.
Wow.
So one of the things he talks about is that when infants are born, they can make every single phoneme that exists on the planet. They can make every single noise that there is. And as they listen to their parents talk in their primary language, they listen to those sounds, they start selecting for making just those sounds. And that attachment theory is the same. That kids, when they're born, are open to whatever the world is. They're feeling into their parents' energy, they're feeling into the world, they're like, I'm feeling really uncomfortable, is somebody gonna help me? And they're learning from all of those interactions what the world's gonna do for them or the world's not gonna do for them. If they can rely on people, they can't rely on people. If sometimes they get their needs met, sometimes they don't get their needs met, and they adjust their behaviors accordingly. I had one, for an example, I had one young lady I worked with who was also at Halcyon. I think she was 13 when I met her. She'd been diagnosed with bipolar. She was born to a 13-year-old in Denver and adopted by wealthy Boulderites, a social worker mom and a lawyer dad. She was in the NICU for about 3 months for health reasons, but also because they didn't know who was going to take her. The 13-year-old couldn't parent her. The 13-year-old's family was fighting over who should parent her. And then the Department of Human Services decided that she just needed to go into foster care. And then the family that fostered her adopted her. And when I met her, she was really dysregulated most of the time. Most of the time. And I did FFT with them, but then I did my sneaky little, I'm gonna kind of make this attachment-focused FFT. I was experimenting at the time, like how can I bring in these attachment things, because my students need this, and they have these attachment disruptions. The FFT isn't working as well for them, so I'm gonna bring in all this attachment stuff. So I did a lot of that with them in the meantime. And one of the stories that came to the narrative that came out of it was, oh honey, you were born to this itty-bitty person, you were 3 months in the hospital, and nurses are great and all, but you didn't have a mom who could respond to you when you started crying.
Yeah.
So babies, when they start crying, they don't usually just cry first, they do other things first. They make little faces. And they're looking for milk. And they're looking around, they're like, where's the grown-up that's gonna feed me? Because I'm making that face, is anybody noticing? And then they make little noises, and then they make bigger noises. And they don't start crying right away, they do all this other stuff first. But for babies who don't get responded to, all those early signals, they learn that they gotta cry right away.
Yeah.
And they gotta cry right away, really loud, so that someone pays attention and comes to get them. So that's what we realized, that was her. And even, she's 13, or she was when I was working with them. And we realized, gosh, honey, that's what you're doing. You gotta cry really loud right away. And your parents are like, whoa! You're throwing shit around the kitchen, and you're destroying things, and you're grabbing knives, and they're like, oh my God, what is going on? She's crying really loud so that someone will notice how much pain she's in, and she's cutting herself on her arm so everybody can see it. She wants people to see her pain. She wants you to see how much pain she's in. And it's from her early stuff, her itty bitty stuff. Even though you adopted her when she was 3 months old, all of that stuff set in utero, in those early minutes and moments and weeks in the hospital. And then got sort of set up by this, parents got divorced when the kiddo was 4. Mom's super serious social worker, kind of like diagnosing her kid all the time. Dad, super funny, really lighthearted, wanted to just joke about everything all the time. Bipolar experience, going back and forth between these two homes,
Jeez.
on top of all the other stuff. So I'm like, this is no wonder your daughter's bipolar, you guys. And it's not just her genetics. It's not just what she came into the world with either. It's also all this other stuff that comes with it. So I hope that's an okay
That's so
example.
helpful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Okay.
This is working, right? Thumbs up?
Yes? Thumbs up? Okay, awesome. So then if you just want a little bit more, his model, diet of developmental psychotherapy, he called it that after there was horrible attachment therapy accidents and people rebirthing and suffocating people and so forth. He shifted his name so he wouldn't be associated with any of that. But his website is there, and
This is so cool.
I love it so much. And his tools that he teaches are for parents. And I just realized this. I was teaching a Spanish family this week, and I wrote it out in English because they're bilingual. Playfulness, love, acceptance, curiosity, empathy, and repair. And the mom said that spells placer. It means pleasure
Jesus.
in Spanish. And I was like, oh, it gives me tingles. It gives me tingles. So playfulness is how we show kids we like them. Especially for kids who've been abused and neglected. They're not so sure that they're lovable. So if you're oshi-gushy lovable with them, they're gonna they might be like, whoa, I'm not used to that, don't do that. Happened to me all the time at Halcyon. Can I give you a hug? No, fuck you. I'm like, okay. Let's just have fun. Okay. So playfulness is that likability. You show kids that you like them because they might not feel like they can be loved. And it's sort of like affection light. And then for those kids who can be loved, you just let them have it. And I love this so much because, I think what happens, at least when you go to a place like DU for a master's degree and you have all these lovely people teaching you, it's very professional. And you learn that you're supposed to be very professional. And that's not really me. And I had all these experiences of just wanting to love the kids that I worked with. I just really wanted to love them. And when I went to dance trainings, he said, love your clients.
Beautiful.
And I was like,
Yeah.
Thank
You
you.
do. You do anyway.
thank you, and it's a journey. You gotta have your own boundaries. You gotta know how to do it and not sort of take all that home with you. But really just giving myself permission to love my clients was so liberating. It's super duper lovely. And for parents to see that you love their kids when they're having so much trouble with them also makes a big difference. So you can really delight in their kids when they're just pulling their hair out with frustration. Acceptance is full-on radical acceptance of the kid's emotional world. And I told parents, it's not about letting them, tear up the kitchen and throw things and stuff like that. You don't accept the behavior, but you accept what's going on inside for them.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
In the example, the little kid you said that they don't like to be hacked.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering when to know or how, if you've experienced this, sometimes like they don't want to be hacked because their family system actually that's threatening to them
Sure.
or brings a lot of fear or things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't actually want it, it's just because the family system created that unsafe environment.
Yeah.
But you might be actually reshaping that.
Yeah, absolutely, I completely agree. And part of, one of the tools I use from that, which I'll bring up in one of the next things, is just asking. Or even just saying, gosh, I really feel like hugging you right now. You know, and then kids are like, they'll get a little bit closer to you, and in play therapy, it feels really beautiful, and the kids sort of like their own auto decision, like, I'm gonna sit as close to my therapist as I can, and then you're like, oh, your leg is touching mine. It feels so nice. So yes, right, it could be any number of things that sort of makes that kid feel like, I don't know, hugging's not okay, or hugging's been dangerous with someone before, and I don't trust that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Curiosity is the antidote to judgment. I tell parents this all the time. It's like, if you're thinking bad, that's bad, you shouldn't do that, I shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that, then your kid's going to feel defensive. And all their defensive stuff's going to come up. Fight, flight, freeze, collapse, you know, like you do that thing and your kid's going to feel that. Curiosity kind of lightens that up. What is that about? Gosh, I wonder why my kid's doing that. Why am I doing that? Where does that come from? Sort of takes the heaviness out of it and the defensiveness out of it. Empathy, I mean, I think that just speaks for itself. And repair, according to the attachment research, is the #1 tool that people have as parents to create a secure attachment with their child, is being able to come back and say, I messed up, I'm sorry, even if I just didn't notice something that you needed. Parents sometimes will be like, well, I didn't even start it. Maybe you didn't, maybe you missed something. I used to say hello to kids at house and be like, hey, good morning, and be like, fuck you. Like, I missed something. I missed something. You must have had a bad day at home, or your parents fought before you got on the bus, or somebody was bullying you already today. So my cheerful little hi was not pleasant. It was not in line with what was going on for you. So even if it seems that, you know, the ick is coming from the kid, parents have the onus on them to be the secure attachment figure that's willing to say, hey, I'm here no matter what happens. This is a for good relationship, for better, for worse. Yes.
I work with domestic violence offenders, and I teach parenting classes in some different environments with some upper middle class, well-resourced folks, and then the domestic violence offenders, if they're in a parenting class, it's because there was a child abuse charge tacked on to whatever charge they got. So when I teach parenting classes, so much of the work is to model. Playfulness does not make sense. Teasing and in a more of a humiliating kind of a way, it makes sense, but playfulness is actually something that a lot of people don't know.
Yes.
And also isn't my norm. So it's like to invite that, or even touch, like these pieces, the therapist then gets to model what that is. And it's not asking them to be different than they are. Yep. It's inviting, because in order to feel any of those things, or to do or respond from that place, you have to feel safe.
Yes. Yes.
So if you don't feel safe in yourself, parents or adults that you're working with are not going to be able to do those things no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super duper hard to do this stuff if your own amygdala is firing and you don't have your own regulation going on, right?
Yeah, playfulness isn't available.
Totally. Empathy is impossible.
Right.
If your amygdala is firing and you're flighting or freezing, whatever it is in that moment, you can't achieve it, right? You really have to, and so much of that is, how do I regulate?
Yes.
How do I bring myself down? How do I notice my triggers?
Yes.
Right? Beautiful. Thank you for bringing that.
And I just want to share, I just got a personal insight that's because of my home, and it was so dysregulating, we never did most of these things, or, I never experienced them. So I'm looking at this and, now at almost 60 years old, I'm thinking, well, I want to really learn playfulness, but it was never even, or curiosity, or repair, when your amygdala and your nervous system is just constantly just trying to survive. As a highly sensitive, so many of us are that way. You know, I've learned now, I mean, this is so off to me, but I mostly wear in Boulder earplugs, hoods, headbands, and live much more in like a womb-like environment. Allison's daughter's similar, highly sensitive, so she introduced me to a 15-pound blanket,
Beautiful.
which is like what I sleep with now, and
Great.
I'm just sharing this, it's so key
Yeah.
for the safety of folks whose nervous systems and amygdalas are just so dysregulated that, you know, it's like anything in the environment can feel like a threat.
Totally. Yes, my daughter's super anxious and runs high on her nervous system too, so I've learned a lot. She's been a great little guru for me.
And
So
you
that-
how old is she?
She is 5, and my daughter's adopted. She's like a miracle adoption. I knew her mom before she got pregnant, and then she was Facebooking about being pregnant, and I was like, wait, when did you get pregnant? And she, you know, we were messaging on Facebook, and I said, I'm so jealous. My husband and I have been trying forever. We were thinking about starting an adoption this summer. This was back in 2013. And she said, well, what about May 28th?
Oh my God, my daughter's.
And I was quivering and shaking and crying, and I was like, it's my daughter, it's my daughter.
Oh my God.
She was born on June 1st, 2013, and that was the day we had said we were going to start an adoption if we couldn't get pregnant. It's like she was born on the very day that we had sort of intentionally set like we were going to start an
Whoa,
adoption.
congratulations. What's her name?
Her name is Isabel, we call her Bella. She's
Wow.
just gorgeous, just beautiful blue eyes, and oh my gosh, she's so pretty. People tell me all the time, and I have no qualms saying, I know, because you know, it's like, none of this. Anyway, all right, so I'm going to move, actually, let's do this too, because we were just talking about nervous system, we're talking about it again in a second. So what I love to teach parents is that, you know, that volcano at the beginning, we have that cycle, it's kind of like behavior, this behavior, and then the next behavior happens, and the next behavior happens. With the attachment model, what I'm trying to get parents to do is not parent to the behavior. Thinking about icebergs as my fancy little computer drawing. Thinking about how icebergs have that 10% above the water, analogous to how our behavior is only 10% of what's happening for us, and trying to encourage parents to think about that. Okay, what your kid is demonstrating on the surface is not what's happening inside.
Right.
So if my daughter is, she used to have this horrible habit of spitting on me. Oh, it's horrible. That was just her behavior, you know, like for my job as a parent was like, what's that about? What is she doing? Is she disgusted? Is she angry? Like, and how do I behave from my heart to her heart, instead of letting my behavior be like, that's bad stuff, that I can't stand it, I'm going to give you a consequence for spitting on me. And really helping parents see like, okay, well this is what's going on with me, and let's have that curiosity about what's going on with you, so I can interact with your emotional world and not just parent to your behavior. Does that make sense?
Wow.
I love doing that for folks, because when we escalate to just parenting to behavior, then our bad parenting behaviors come out, and the kid's bad behavior comes out, and then we just have this massive power struggle, and nobody really feels good about that. You end up, you know, parents will end up screaming obscenities at their kids, or, you know, in the worst case, you know, hitting them, hurting them. Kids fighting back and biting and kicking, and that's just like full on out of our human brains behavior, right? All right.
Deanna, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Speak up, okay, so the camera.
How do you work with the parents? Like when you, I know it's a whole process, but I'm guessing a lot of parents feel guilty about how they used to parent versus what you're trying to model for them to do differently. How do you work with that guilt that they might have?
So what's really nice about the attachment model and the PACE skills is that you use them with the parents too.
Yeah.
You stay really, you stay accepting and curious and loving, so that when they're examining their own behavior, the result is them being curious about themselves and where it came from, instead of the guilt sort of comes more from like, oh God, I'm a bad parent, I'm such a bad parent.
Yeah.
Right, and that's such an old feeling. Like that's a developmental task of a toddler. Am I a good kid or am I a bad kid?
Right.
Right. So when parents fall into that, I'm a bad parent, it's all my fault, and feel really guilty or feel real shame about it.
So young.
We want to help them get curious,
Yeah.
so that they can sort of lift that that feeling of the shame and just start to wonder, why is it that I did, oh my God, my parents never played with me. And I never learned how to play, and I always had to be the good kid, or I always had to do this, or I left the house when I was 13 and got pregnant when I was 15 and I've done this all by myself. Really helping parents get curious about what's up for them. And that it's not because they're bad people, it's because they're living out what came down to them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
And developmentally, when this stuff comes up, they're probably like somewhere between the ages of 3 and 7 or 8 or 9 themselves.
Yeah.
You know, that feeling of shame or, just I'm terrible or, everything that they were told or they experienced in school. So
Yeah.
to really work with them, that's what we've been talking about so much in the development classes, that you can be 60 years old, but developmentally you're dealing with your 7-year-old inside
Absolutely.
yourself or your 4-year-old.
Yeah, absolutely.
How much can I do? How well? Not at all.
Yeah, beautiful, thank you. I'll just add one more thing to that bit. That Dan Hughes talks about shame and guilt in his manual for the model that he developed, and suggests that guilt is that sort of healthy sense of, I just did something wrong and I need to make amends.
Right.
And I always use the example because it's so super simple. If I accidentally step on somebody's foot, I'd be like, oh geez, sorry, I didn't see your foot there, my bad.
Guilt.
I'm sorry for hurting you. But a person full of shame
Yeah.
might be like, what the fuck is your foot doing in my way?
Yeah.
What is that? Ah, I can't believe you did that to me. They're like, oh, whoa, what just happened? And this is so common for especially our super high risk youth and our drug abusing parents and all it, because there's so much shame. And when we experience a deep amount of shame, there's no room for appropriate guilt. Because doing something wrong means we're bad, and we can't tolerate feeling like we're bad human beings. So we kind of push it out to others and be like, it's your fault. It's, and the teenage boys that I've worked with, I'm like, okay, honey, it's not everybody else's fault. Like, oh, you're a good kid, you're a really good kid, you just made some bad choices. Let's figure this out. And working with other people who don't do what we do, right? Probation officers and judges and parents and all this kind of things, there's a lot of times they'll be like, well, this kid won't take accountability for anything.
Right.
Well, there might be a reason for why it's too hard for them to take accountability for what's going on.
So I was curious with like the tools that you mentioned and then like parenting heart to heart, do you still use those techniques even if the family hierarchy is skewed, like if the parent is on the same level as the child, or even if the child is parenting
Yes,
the parent?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Because whether the parent is on a hierarchy, an authority position, or not, there's still the attachment figure. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the parent still needs to be that safe person that the child comes back to when life's gone wrong, or they've made a mistake, or there's been some break. Does that make sense?
It does.
And don't you think too that even if the child is basically in charge, when the child is having those big behaviors, the parent is trying to parent. Either way.
Yeah.
Like, regardless of where they are, there is this, you have to stop
Yep.
place. So to that heart-to-heart kind of fits no matter what it seems.
Yeah, and that curiosity about where's the behavior coming from.
Yeah.
Because what we kind of want to do as parents, and I definitely do this too much more than I wish I did, is just stop it. Stop it. I don't want you to do that anymore. Why are you pulling your pants down in front of Grandpa? Don't do that. Oh, Grandpa was laughing, but that's not okay. All right. So I was doing all this stuff. I was doing FFT, and I was managing this team, and I was doing all this managerial stuff and referrals and matching therapists to families and hearing all the worst stories about all the hardest families that my therapists were working with. And then my job changed. And I've been doing family therapy for a long time. I was like, what am I going to do with the 6-year-old in the room all by himself? I have no idea what to do with that. So Lisa Dion, she's a Naropa
awesome.
graduate. She's amazing. She has her own play therapy institute here in Boulder, and she developed synergetic play therapy. So I took her 5-day intensive and sat with a 6-year-old in the room for 8 days.
She taught yesterday. She's teaching the class.
Awesome.
She started yesterday, and I was
Awesome.
going to go, and I just like spaced it out. But
So
she's
good.
incredible, you guys. She teaches here, so
So good. So I took her training. And this is now mostly what I'm doing with 5 to 10-year-olds alone in a room. And this is the nervous system stuff,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't get to take my training directly from her, she's trained other people, so I took her training from a couple other folks who are just super delightful. And if you've seen her, gone to any of her trainings, she talks a lot about the setup, and I love this so much, this like changed my world. That kids set their parents, their caregivers,
Maria.
guardians, whoever,
Listen to this.